Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Comics Lair. We're sponsored by Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. I'm your host, Nancy Northcott. This panel will discuss the TV show Smallville. And I'll start by asking our panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about how they became interested in the show. Elektra, will you start?
Hi, I'm Elektra Hammond. I'm a writer and an editor, and I started getting to read superhero comics even more when I was in college. And Superman has always been, a big favorite. I watched Superman when I was young, George Reeves. And when there was a Superman based TV series, I jumped right on the bandwagon and watched it all the way through once a week.
Okay, Ian.
Hi, I'm Ian J. Malone, author of the Mako Saga trilogy, author of the Swamp Eagle Security trilogy over in the Four Horsemen universe, a couple of other odds and ends, Colonies Lost, et cetera, et cetera. I'm also a podcaster, host of the Dudes in Hyperspace podcast, among a couple of other shows that I produce. Smallville was a very easy sell for me. I was a lifelong Superman fan, always. As a kid growing up through the 80s, you could not love Christopher Reeve as Superman. You will believe a man can fly was the perfect tagline for that, because those films, particularly the first two, really captured our imagination as kids of that era. And I'm sight impaired, so for me, comic books were never a really accessible medium. But when they hit the silver screen, and particularly with that actor, Superman was my guy. And I followed the character all the way through the 80s and the 90s, all the way through the quest for peace and all that. Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. I was a huge fan of that one back in the 90s with Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher. So this was a character that was very near and dear to me. And, I was working in radio broadcasting at the time that Smallville premiered. And it was a friend of mine that I worked with at the station that was like, hey, did you hear they're doing a show about Kid Superman? I'm like, really? Like, we already tried that in the late 80s with Superboy and it didn't go so well. He's like, no, this actually looks like it might be decent. It's on that new WB series. So I was like, oh, awesome. It's Superman meets Dawson's Creek. But why not? Superman, I'll give it a shot. And I got to the pilot and I was sold, and I was a fan that watched every episode right up until the final shot.
Well, I too watched the George Reeves Superman shows. They were rerun in the afternoon, and my grandfather was my babysitter in the afternoon. And George Reeves came on in black and white with, jumping out the window. And then we'd see this little cartoon of him, this little figure of him going against a blurry background. But for me, Christopher Reeve will always be the Superman in my head. I think Brandon Routh was great. I thought all the actors who've played him have done a really good job. Tyler Hoechlin is just brilliant, but Christopher Reeve is the Superman in my head. And I actually came to Smallville via Silver Age Superboy comic books, when Smallville had kind of a 1930s vibe to it with gangsters and cars with running boards. But there was something about that small town, maybe because I lived in a small town, that I related to. And then when the show came on, I was kind of skeptical about it too, because I also remember the Superboy TV show. But the Remy Zero theme song came up, and I've never heard a theme song that, in my obviously unbiased opinion, fits the TV show it was written for. Well, actually, it wasn't written for it, but the TV show that used it better than Remy Zero's Somebody Save Me fits Smallville. And so I just loved it. And it's been gone a while now, but people still remember it. So what we're going to do this for this panel is we're going to briefly discuss the first season, which was kind of the launching pad. And then we're going to kind of go into things that we liked about the series as a whole, things that maybe we wish had been done differently. So season one, do you all think it's fair to say season one was dominated by the Meteor Mutant of the Week stories or not?
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But listen, in their defense, defense of the writers, it's a tried and true formula. You're trying to world build. You're trying to introduce the audience to, your version of what this story is going to be. And that means, spoon feeding a little bit at the time about Clark's life, Clark's family, introducing the audience to the fact that this is a 14-year-old kid, not a grown man running around Metropolis, and he's learning things. And I think that the freak of the week, as they called it, was a really, really effective tool, if you will, to be able to feed people the information to get us to a point where we had what we needed in order to jump into the bigger stories. It also did a great job, I thought, of establishing the characters of the surrounding cast, Lex Luthor, Lana Lang, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, was it a slower season? Sure. We all look back on Smallville and we think of the caves and Christopher Reeve and a lot of the big stuff that comes later, but they had to lay the groundwork. And I think the Media Rock Freak of the Week formula did a very adequate, workmanlike job, as we like to say in the sports industry.
Okay, Elektra.
Well, and when you're trying to build an audience, you can't have them walk into a long arc of something in the middle and try and get them to grab onto it and understand. And this way they were trying to build it one story at a time, and it was something you could understand from stem to stern. It was an episode, it was easy, and if people enjoyed it, maybe they'd come back for the next one. And it was a very good way to build up people who liked it. And it wasn't super exciting, and we can look back with the benefit of hindsight and say, yeah, we enjoyed later seasons more, but they had to build the audience first before they could do complicated things.
Well,
And
obviously they built enough of an audience to get a season 2 out of it.
Sure.
There were still beautiful details they put into that first season. They remembered to stick in the bit about I lost a word, hanging up somebody in the in the cornfield for the team as something they did every season. They included the bit about Lex Luthor having a beautiful, beautiful head of hair and losing it. They actually justified that. Every other movie Luthor has either had hair or he's inexplicably bald, and they never explain it. And
I think it's worth noting too, when you look back at that time period, 2000, 2001, you're right in the middle of the heyday of the X-Men franchise. And so the whole mutant, freak of the week kind of motive, everybody's very familiar with that at the time. And I think, to Elektra's point about growing the audience, that was very accessible to a lot of people. And that made it very easy to wrap your head around what was going on the screen.
Well, and one of the things that they did that's a little different is they had Clark and Lex really be friends and stay friends for a long time. Even after Lex lost his hair, they were still more or less buddies. There was friction. They had their falling out times in there, but they did get along well most of the time. And one of the things I liked about it was that nobody really suspected Clark was different. There was none of this Lana Lang trying to figure out Superboy's secret identity. Oh my goodness, save me from that. Because that's just, when I looked back at comic books and the Lois and Lana thing, the hunt for Superman's secret identity was just, oh my word, they really didn't know how to write female characters, did they? So, I liked them much better on this show. And it's interesting because, excuse me, another show that had somebody with a weird ability and a problem every single week and never took a break from it because it was the whole premise of the show was Haven. I don't know if you all are familiar with that, but it wasn't a Superman show. And so it was just a show about the challenges of dealing with a community where people have weird abilities. And then there was an episode in season 1 where some guys got Meteor Rock asthma inhalers. I don't know if you watched the Titan show on HBO Max, but that's what Jason Todd helped turn Jason Todd into Red Hood, because he had a gas that Scarecrow had invented that amped up your courage and your strength. And it was also twisting his brain. And even in Superman and Lois, there was the football team inhalers plot. And so that kind of, they only used it in one episode, but it seemed to kind of go forward. And you never know whether somebody was inspired by seeing something here or whether it was synchronicity. But that's the first I remember of seeing that.
And it's a beautiful, concentrated way to deliver drugs like that. And they've used it, the times they've used it to good effect.
Yeah. So shifting to a more general focus, what did you think of the dynamic of the Kent family and the actors, obviously the actor who played Clark, Tom Welling, but also John Schneider as Jonathan Kent and Annette O'Toole as Martha?
They gave them a super believable family, especially given that, well, Clark had superpowers. His parents weren't unwilling to discipline him. They gave him boundaries. And that's something that seems to not happen a lot, is either the parents are missing in a lot of the shows that are based for that age group. It seems either the parents are gone, or they're very permissive, or they're very strict, because we've got to allow them to rebel. And they were perfectly normal parents that punished him when he did things wrong, and seemed to be very encouraging of him when he was learning how to do things. And they were the parents you always wanted.
I absolutely loved it. It was one of the things that made the show for me. Listen, man, I grew up a kid in the 80s in the South. I watched some Dukes of Hazzard. All right. So when Bo Duke showed up on Smallville, I was about it. I loved it. Also loved Annette O'Toole, and I thought that the two of them together on screen it was exactly, when you think about the Superman persona, the Boy Scout, the good guy, the ultimate good guy, that's what you see him coming from, was that type of family upbringing. And I think Elektra really nailed it when she talked about, how the way that they raised him was very caring, very loving. God, into season 2, when Jonathan Kent goes to the cave and makes the deal with Jor-El to get what he needed in order to be able to go bring Clark back from Metropolis, it ripped your heart out, because you knew where it was going. If you know Superman mythos, you knew where they were going to take that, because they tipped the cap that, all right, this is giving you these abilities is not going to come without a price. And so for those of us who know the story, obviously we know what that price is going to be. And instantly we saw the gravity and the weight of that. And it was just like, oh God, when Clark finds out one day what his dad did because of his mistake, this is going to hurt, and it's going to hurt bad. But that's a loving father for you, and I think that, particularly the way Jonathan played that character to a T, it made you love that family, and it just made you fall in love with Tom Welling that much more and root for him. So I loved it. I love the casting. I love the way they were written. To me, it's what made Smallville. I love the dynamic between, Lex and Clark, but listen, that goes away after a while.
Yeah.
The Lana stuff, Lana Lang. Listen, I had friends fatigue at that point with Ross and Rachel in the 90s. So, after a while that took its toll. I never got tired of watching John and Martha Kent on the screen, ever. And when we said goodbye to Jonathan, man, that was a hard day. I drank a lot of bourbon that night.
Well, they did come back to that in the later season, and they didn't back away from it. They really went all in on that. And I thought that was really effective. But what do you all think of having Jor-El as kind of a deus ex machina running through the series? Not every episode, but popping up here and there.
I love the fact that they got Terrence Stamp to be his voice.
That was
awesome.
definitely the best part of it, was that
Yeah,
they got Terrence Stamp to be his voice as
yeah,
a call out to someone who, you know,
yeah,
who's Zod,
yeah.
kneel before Zod.
I,
Um,
I go ahead, Elektra.
but he seemed almost a little bit, it was hard to tell what his motives were. And he was almost a little too convenient sometimes in the, he was very, he wasn't as well written as I would have liked. It
Yeah,
was very black and white.
Mhm.
yeah. I think I liked the plan for him. I think the whole Clark running from his heritage, running from his, what he is, and where he came from, just wanting to be the kid from Smallville and not wanting all this responsibility. I mean, look at the age of the character. He's like 16, 17 years old. We're all doing that. We all want to go do our own thing. And again, I think what Smallville did, and this is not my take. I wish to God it was. I don't remember whose take it was, but it nails the show. They flipped what people come to a Superman show to watch. Clark Kent was always the disguise. You were there to see Superman. For the first time, Smallville made it to where you cared about Clark Kent because Superman wasn't there yet, and you cared about what Clark was going through. And so anyway, back to Jor-El. Everybody can relate to that, wanting to run away from responsibility and run away from the things that face you. So I understood Jor-El's role in that. To Elektra's point, though, about how he was it was a little nebulous at times what his intentions were. I kind of credit that to some of the flip flopping that was going on in the writer's room. Once you started to get on into seasons 3 and 4, that was when you started to see, Al and Miles start to kind of, I think, take their hands off the wheel a little bit, and new people, fresh blood started coming in to the writer's room, and they may have wanted to go a different way. And I think the Jor-El character kind of faltered a little bit in the end, though, when it all finally came together in season 10, and Clark goes to the fortress and says, "I'm ready." And he gets, Jonathan Ghost or whatever he is, walks out with the suit and all that. It was a great moment, and you were happy to see them finally all come to terms. And it was the end that we all rooted for.
Well, and I liked the fact that Jor-El was not in every episode. He was not a primary driver of the plot. He was definitely a supporting character. I mean, one of my issues with DC movies in general is that they tend to cast an unknown actor in the title role, like, or a lesser known actor in the title role, and a big name in what should be the supporting role. And you're not going to get a big name actor as Jor-El or Jonathan Kent take 15 minutes of screen time in a 2-hour movie. That's not going to happen. And for me, it shifts the focus of the story away from the character it's supposed to be about and onto the character who really should be playing more of a secondary role. And so I really liked that Smallville did not do that. Jor-El
Right.
showed up now and again, mostly to make trouble, which is, handy. You have one father figure who's truly supportive, let me help you get what you want, let me help you build the life that you want. And the other one going, this is your destiny and you need to shape up and do this. And so it would have been boring, I think, if Jor-El had just been supportive of Clark's ambitions.
I did think it was interesting, and you guys are obviously much more fluent in the comics than I am. I don't recall any other take on the Superman story that saw Jor-El come to Earth before Superman. When they did that, and they kind of did the whole, not Back to the Future, but just that whole kind of idea that he came to Earth and he met the Kents and he had a love and an experience there, and that's why he sent Clark there. I'd never seen that before. That was a twist to me. Have you guys heard of that before?
I haven't. I mean, there were some, what DC Comics used to call imaginary stories, like they're not all imaginary stories,
Right.
in which Jor-El and Lara came to Earth or met the Kents or Clark met them. But I don't remember anything that was supposedly canon when they did that. Do you, Elektra?
No, I mean, Superman and Lois is kind of implying that some stuff happened, but they haven't really filled that out fully fleshed yet about what really happened. I think we're going to have to wait a little bit more to figure out exactly what happened in the past.
Yeah, if the CW doesn't pull the plug like they just did on Stargirl, we'll see. So
One point I'd like to make before we move on
sure.
is they've been very good about letting the Smallville kids actually be at a small town high school, and they were allowed to act like the age they were, despite the fact that the actors were significantly older than the parts they were playing. In many times we see kids playing high school kids and the actors are older and they are acting like they are older, and there are, for lack of a better word, far more shenanigans going on. When Clark's parents found him with a girl when he was like 16, they were appalled, which was the appropriate reaction when you are that age and you're living in small town America and your son isn't dating. And there's a little bit too, this is who Clark Kent is. He is a Boy Scout. He doesn't like pop into bed with a girl he hasn't dated.
We know there's a really good, I saw it on Twitter, and as is usual with Twitter, I saw it and then it was gone and I'll probably never find it again. But it might come up if somebody went into Google and put Henry Cavill talks about Superman. And I don't really remember the specifics of it, but it was, the theme of what he said was Superman as a force for good. And it reminded me of Christopher Reeve saying how Superman, when Superman says to Lois, I'm a friend, well, that's what Superman is for everybody.
Really excited to see where they go with him, by the way. I know this panel is not about that, but I actually have hope that we're finally going to get a good Superman movie. I really do. I think Cavill's the guy. I think they have sold him short his entire run as Superman, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with him moving forward. Anyway.
Yeah, me too. Maybe we'll have to come back and do a panel about that when we see what they do.
Hopefully we have great reason to.
Yes. Elektra, do you want to add anything else before we roll?
No, I'm waiting to hear what you have to say.
Okay. Well, who's your favorite? If you had to pick one or two favorite characters, and you can pick from any season over the whole 10 seasons, which would you pick and why? Nobody's jumping in.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead, Elektra.
I'm running through all of them in my brain. Well, I like Lex Luthor. I love this version of Lex Luthor, who isn't a super genius. He's just super smart, and when he doesn't know something, he just finds somebody who can do it for him. And he's friends with Clark, and they have a normal friendship. They argue, they make up, they stay friends, and until they had an unforgivable break, they stayed friends through any number of arguments and had a pretty normal relationship until there was you've been investigating me this whole time. But they actually seem to have a reasonable friendship, and Lex is the villain you love to hate. I mean, Lionel is just evil. He's evil and he's smarmy, and you know that even when he's your friend, he's not. Lex was just, you wanted so much for him not to really be evil underneath it all, but you knew it was coming because he's Lex Luthor. And this was an incarnation that I really liked.
And I am the villain of this story. Was such an awesome line. Such an awesome line. Yeah, I'm sure Rosenbaum is Lex Luthor. I mean, come on, that's as home run as it gets. For my money, is the best iteration of Lex Luthor I've ever seen, and that's saying something when Lex Luthor was played by Gene Hackman. But Rosenbaum was unbelievable. I mean, and again, a lot of it I think has to do with the way they treated that relationship and the way they let it grow, and they allowed it to really. They allowed that friendship to really blossom and really come together, and they gave it time. before they tore it down, so that you could really feel that sense of loss. It was, it's, for my money, it was everything that the Kenobi series was not on Disney Plus. Not to get off on a tangent on that, because this isn't that panel, but I felt like that, that story really needed to be a story about two brothers who were the best of friends and brothers in arms. And so when you get to that point, when it's just not going to work, you hate it. You hate the fact that it came to this, because it should have never happened. They made you feel that in Smallville. And a lot of that was very much due to Michael Rosenbaum and the way he played that character. Jonathan Kent, obviously, I was a huge fan of Schneider playing that part. So that goes without saying. As far as kind of secondary characters that came in the later years, I was a huge James Marsters fan. I loved him as Spike in Buffy and Angel. I had a good fortune of meeting and chit chat with him for a while at Dragon Con one year between panels. Super, super nice guy, total gentleman. I really liked his take as Brainiac. I thought that was a neat, the way they kind of put him in there as the professor, and Clark's at a point when he's kind of looking for a mentor, and Brainiac realizes exactly what he's dealing with there. In a way, it's kind of like the seduction of Clark Kent. But the way it was all written and the way Marsters played that out was really, really cool.
Well, I'll throw out another one there. Oliver Queen.
Sure.
I was going to say Oliver too. You go ahead though.
Yeah, Oliver being a rich guy who's very, very smart, and he saw a need and he filled it. And it's, I'm not you, Boy Scout. I pulled people together. And when I saw a need, I found the people I needed to do it. And I'm playing the long gun game. I don't just, run in there and try and do it by myself. I built a team, and we're working this thing together because there's a problem that needs to be solved. It's not just one problem now, it's a whole big problem internationally, and we have got to solve this.
Jack Reacher playing Aquaman was awesome, by the way.
Yeah.
Well, and
that's one of my favorite episodes.
If you joined up and behaved yourself, you would have gotten to pick your own nickname.
But I think they were really good at adding characters at a time when the show could use a little bit of a pick-me-up. And that's what Justin Hartley was as Oliver Queen. And he shook up the dynamic between Clark and Lois. Like you say, like Elektra said, he kind of challenged Clark's Boy Scout approach to everything. And I really enjoyed him as Oliver. And I think Tom Welling, like Christopher Reeve, like Brandon Routh, gets underrated because people think the good guy is easy to be. And I don't think it is easy to be the good guy and not be boring. And all the Superman actors have managed to do that. And they don't get, in my opinion, enough credit for it. But for me, the show really picked up and took off when Lois Lane came to Smallville. I just thought Erica Durance was terrific as Lois. I would watch her be Lois Lane whenever, because I just enjoyed her performance so much. There were several others, but we could, if we took turns naming characters we liked, we'd pretty much be here for an hour doing that. So, did anybody want to add anything on characters before we move on? Well, what's your favorite episode or arc from the show? Ian, you want to start?
Sure. I mean, it's hard to go wrong with the Christopher Reeve stuff. We waited. I mean, like I had a buddy of mine who worked night shift as a cop. And so he was on duty the night that aired. And so I recorded it on VHS tape, because this is just before TiVo had arrived. And so I had it, and he came over to my house and we watched it together after I watched it live. Obviously I wasn't waiting. We watched it together whenever he get off duty and hung out. And it was just so cool. I mean, it was surreal to see Christopher Reeve sitting there in the chair and all that, but it felt like a real passing of the torch. And I felt like the way that they built up the mystique around the Virgil Swan character, while they're bringing Clark to this point when he's really starting to to come to grips with the fact that he's different and that he may be from someplace different. Like it was a really, really well done arc. I didn't feel like it was rushed, and I felt like when you got the payoff, you really, really got the payoff.
Elektra?
Well, I hate to be repetitious, but I'm going to go back to when all of the work Oliver's doing pays off, and now they've got something of a team working, and including Chloe playing Overwatch, despite Allison Mack being somewhat problematic these days.
Wow.
It's showing that they're doing stuff together and there's a team. We've got Justice League, or at least the very beginnings of it. And that's something that DC, for all their movies and attempts, we got a Justice League movie, but they didn't really do the work. And it's not the Justice League movie I wanted. And this was Justice League that I wanted, really.
Well, that's the episode Odyssey, season 8, episode 1, where Clark is lost and he's doesn't have superpowers, and he's, a captive laborer, and Oliver leads the Justice League to come find him. That is one of my favorite episodes, and I think it's because of the teamwork in it. And I also I've been a Legion of Superheroes fan since I was 8 years old. So I'm picky about my Legion of Superheroes. But the episode where they appeared on Smallville, even if they did de-age Garth, which was not my favorite thing, I thought they did a good job with it. And then they used the Legion flight ring to propel the alternate future that Lois saw, which was an arc that I really enjoyed. I like things like that, where we take the characters, and they're the same people, mostly at least, and we take them out of their familiar slots that we know them in, and then they're doing other things, like Oliver's leading the resistance, and Chloe's an archer, and they're trying to stop the thing that's keeping the sun from being yellow so that Clark can survive. And I just really loved that arc a lot. I mean, I guess it was just one episode, Pandora or something like that. But I like the way they drilled down to the characters, and it was a Superman with no powers. It was Clark with no powers episode. And that's kind of a custom in the comic books. You have to have an episode, a book or an episode of Clark with no powers, because that shows us who Clark is as a person. And it was nice, I thought.
Well, there's an episode of Crisis. One of the pieces of Crisis was showing the Tom Welling Superman on a world where he'd given up his powers so that he could have a family and kids.
Yeah.
That was
fun.
The Tom Welling Superman. That was just heartbreaking and wonderful.
Yeah.
I thought the highlight of the Crisis was really Brandon Routh. I felt like, when you look back at Superman Returns, he was a nobody actor. And he was brought in and told by Bryan Singer, look like Christopher Reeve, act like Christopher Reeve, sound like Christopher Reeve, be Christopher Reeve. And what are you going to do? Not do it? They're telling you to be Superman. Of course, you're going to put on the cape and you're going to go do your best to be Christopher Reeve. I felt like when they brought him back as Kingdom Come Superman in the Crisis series, you really got a flavor for what he could have been on the silver screen as a Superman. And I mean, for my money, I've watched Superman and Superman and Lois. Is that the new one on the CW? It didn't grab me. I, for my money, would have loved to have seen Brandon Routh get a show as Superman. He was fantastic, but it was great that they gave the nod to Tom Welling and Erica, because, and they even said as much. Smallville laid the foundation for everything that was the Arrowverse. You don't got Smallville, you don't have any of those shows. Yeah. So it felt right that they had that in there, and it was great to see them back reprising those roles.
Well, one character that I wish they had done more with is Pete Ross. I think Allison Mack was fine as Chloe, but I came to Superman and Superboy in the version of continuity where Pete Ross accidentally discovered Clark's secret on a camping trip. He woke up in the middle of a thunderstorm and he saw Clark changing clothes in the tent to go off and handle an emergency. And he never let on that he had any idea about it. And it's not that I didn't think they handled it well in Smallville. They did. I mean, Clark trusted Pete with his secret, and Pete went to great lengths to protect it. But then Pete left. And so for me, as what used to be called an old fart fan of this particular continuity, even though I thought that Allison Mack did a good job with Chloe and Chloe was an interesting character, there was a little part of me that went, yes, but you're stealing Pete Ross's job. So I thought the actor who played Pete was great. I just wish we had seen more.
Didn't he run into some legal problems though? Like, isn't that why he left the show early? Is because the actor ran? I could be totally off base on that.
I don't know.
No, not. I don't think he had legal problems. He turns up on ER and does a couple of seasons as one of the characters' brother. He has a fantastic arc on that.
Well, I think he came back for one episode later in the season, but I was always sort of a Pete Ross fan, and Pete Ross knowing Superboy's secret identity was important at the tail end of a Legion story, and so, I'm always going to enshrine the Legion version of anything because that's just what I do. Were there any other characters that you felt should have had more play, or maybe had too much play?
I wasn't terribly huge on their take on the Flash. I was not a big Bart Allen guy. Grant Gustin, for my money, was a fantastic Flash. So he obviously came later on in Arrow. Just, I don't know, there was something about that kid that I didn't quite get. I liked just about everybody else. I really liked Aquaman. And this is tough for me to say because obviously I'm a Florida State guy, but I loved, and Smallville did this so well, the classic Aquaman look of the orange top and the green pants. This is because my man was on the swim team at the University of Miami, where their colors are orange and green. I thought that was cool. It was really, really neat the way that they used that to introduce Aquaman into the Smallville lore. But, kind of getting back to what you guys were talking about with Oliver, that's what I felt like AC brought to the table was he was the first one to really kind of get in Clark's face and say, man, you got to understand there's a lot going on in the world outside of Smallville and Metropolis. Like there are people way beyond that need your help. And I, for one, am not going to sit down and let them be. I'm going to go be a part of that fight. And you need to come along for this too. One day you need to realize it's a big world out there. I thought that was cool the way that they played that in. And you only got him for the team up episode later when they did the Justice League and training episode. But I thought the one episode that you had him, he was a good fit.
Well, didn't we meet Mira later I think we met Mira in a later episode.
I don't recall that.
But one of the things I liked was the teamwork thing. It's like the line in Zack Snyder's Justice League where Bruce says the team needs Clark because they need somebody like Clark to pull them together. And you're right, Ian, in that we don't really see Clark as a team player until all that started with the other heroes. I mean, he was a loyal and a supportive friend, and he would help people and he would cooperate with people, but it's not quite the same thing as this is my team. And I really liked that aspect of it. And I really enjoyed the Justice Society episodes. And I think Michael Shanks should have gotten an award for his Hawkman. I thought he was great. Elektra, did you want to add anything else?
Well, I'm going to second all of that. I mean, definitely more Aquaman, definitely more Hawkman. And they did a great job of showing that this was a younger version of Superman who still felt that he could just do anything. And no matter how many times he bounced into something that was full of kryptonite and knocked him out, he still leaped before he looked. Even if it was lead shielded, he wouldn't go in slowly. He just dove right in every time. He just never learned.
Well, he never stops trying.
And that was his personality. The I can't be hurt. I can't be wounded. I'm the guy who's going to just solve the problem, fix it, and go on my way. Somebody needs to be helped. I will help them.
Well, and then we have the red blue blur when he was not wearing the suit, because I remember reading that he wasn't allowed to wear the suit because there was some kind of contractual something.
No flights, no tights. That was the name of the show.
Yeah. But he was still the Blur, and he wore that really cool, I thought, black duster with the S emblem on the chest, and all of Metropolis is who's the Blur. And then that kind of rebounds when Zod comes along.
Well, after the first maybe 2 seasons, they pretty much dressed him almost exclusively in red and blue.
Yeah.
I mean, that was it. You always saw him in those colors, and they looked great on him in the bright reds and the bright blues. So it was great for the actor, but you just got used to seeing him in those poppy colors.
Yeah.
It was another great decision that they made behind the scenes somewhere. We got to put him in those Superman colors. You never see Clark wearing like bright green ever.
Well, I think that also says to the viewer, this is Clark.
Sure.
Because those are his signature colors.
I mean, like I said, with Aquaman, orange and green, that's what you got. When you had the Flash come on, he's wearing a red hoodie. I mean, Smallville was great at that.
And this is an absolute opposition to when Marvel first started making movies. Well, it wasn't even Marvel. It was whoever, Fox, I think, bought the rights to the original X-Men movies. And they made that first X-Men movie, and they changed all the outfits.
Right.
And Wolverine complained about it, and they looked at him and they said, "What do you want? Yellow spandex?" And it just all became a joke about, we're not gonna, they didn't even bother. They put them in what they thought would be appropriate, which was basically, black leather.
Right.
Yeah.
They didn't try to do comic specific or comic reminiscent outfits until later.
Yeah. Well,
But
and that's one thing that you all said you wanted to talk about, which is the attention to detail on Smallville.
Yeah, I mean, again, when you look at the little subtle notes, like the attire that the costuming that they would put them in, it was all cool. It all fit. It was all for those of us who grew up in the comics and grew up with those stories. There were all those little nods from the blue denim blue jeans with the red jacket over the top and the blue t-shirt underneath. You had Lex always wore some sort of a darker tone, which set that. You had Aquaman, you had the Flash, but when you got later into the series and you were introduced to Green Arrow, I felt like the tactical stuff that they had made sense. It fit the comic look, but I felt like it still looked very functional and it looked like it fit the world. They didn't go above and beyond on that. And I thought that was, again, it gets back to kind of that grassroots, theme that was Smallville.
That very first episode, when they're trying to get this child they found in a field back home, and they're flagged down by Lionel Luthor, who's also had an accident, and he desperately wants to get to a hospital with his kid who's, his hair is falling out. He doesn't know what's going on. And they're all bundled into this truck together. And the 2 kids are like waving at each other. That is one of the cutest things ever. But it also ties Clark and Lex together from the very beginning of Clark's time on Earth.
Sure.
Yeah. And it establishes that, the Kents, even in this absolute dire desperation, they stopped and helped someone else, because that's the kind of people they were. And you could never see the Kents drive by someone and not stop who needed help. It wasn't who they were.
Yeah.
There are just all sorts of things. When Dr. Swan's assistant comes to Martha's aid when she called the foundation, she gives a little comment about, I understand about wanting things that you can't have. And Martha says, you and Dr. Swan? And she says, once, long ago, in another life.
Yep.
A nod back to when she and Chris Reeve were in the original Superman and she played Lois Lane. It was just, a little nod back to the fans again of the original Superman movie. It just, every casting choice, they didn't just put her in there, they let her make a comment.
Yeah.
Just, they didn't have to, but they did.
Yep. Ian, did you want to add anything?
No, I mean, and then I don't know if this is on your question list or not, but another thing that, I mean, you can't talk about Smallville and not talk about the music. And I felt like, this Supernatural is the same way. I've been on panels to talk about that. I felt like the WB/the CW's use of music to drive the stories that they were trying to tell at that time were perfect. You look at Supernatural and the way they use the best of mullet rock, Ozzy Osbourne, Metallica, Kansas, it fit that show to a T. Smallville was the same way. When you look at the early 2000s and you're looking at Incubus and you're looking at Remy Zero and you're looking at Fuel and you're looking at Sixpence None the Richer. And I mean, like it was the soundtrack of that time. And, we were talking about this off air before we started this panel. Talon Mix and Metropolis Mix, man. I had them both on CD, and still have them on my iPhone today. So it was one more thing that just made that show so wonderful at the time, because you just hadn't seen that. It was all so new and refreshing, and it was just so cool to see. And it's informed so much of the way superhero stuff is handled on the screen since. It all started with Smallville. So
I can't imagine someone else playing that role, but the second choice was Jensen Ackles.
Yep.
And that's just absolutely blows my mind, given how much time I spend doing this, talking about Supernatural.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and he was on Smallville for a while.
Yep. Yeah, season 4.
Yeah.
Yep. And now Tom Welling is going to play Samuel. No, it's not Winchester. It's Mary's father in Winchester.
Samuel Campbell on
Campbell,
the Winchesters.
Yep.
Well, and for anyone who happens to not be aware of it, we do a lot of Supernatural programming.
A little bit.
A
little bit. Hi, Gail.
Yeah, hi, Gail. One of the things we wanted to talk about was guest casting, and I would extend that to supporting actor casting as well. Who all did you think was particularly well cast?
Oh, God. Michael McKean as Perry White. Loved it. I loved everything about that episode. I mean, right up to the end when he's, when Clark's dropping him off at the bus stop and he tells him, kid, I've read your stuff. It's rough. You bury the lead, which is like journalism 101. But there's something to that. Keep at it. It was awesome. And only in a way that Michael McKean could play,
I'm amazed.
I loved him as Perry.
I am amazed they didn't bring him back for more guest shots, given that he's married to Mrs. Kent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They should have taken advantage of that because he was so very good.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, I've already raved about Michael Shanks, and he's a standout for me. I'm a Stargate fan, and so I'm used to seeing Michael Shanks as Daniel Jackson.
Daniel Jackson.
So seeing him as Hawkman was an interesting change. But I also thought that Michael Hogan was really good as Slade Wilson in the episodes about the Vigilante Registration Act. Hello, Avengers Accords. Smallville got there first. Thought he was just really, really good. But then he was really, really good on Battlestar Galactica. So it's not surprising that he would just do a great job. And
I did
really
like Sam Witwer as
yeah.
Doomsday. I didn't like that. I didn't like Doomsday. I didn't like the way that character was handled, but I do like Sam Witwer, and I think he did a great job bringing something to the show.
Well, and I've heard he's always been, I've never met him myself or been to one of his fan events, but I hear he's always really been good with the fans as well.
Yeah.
Which I think all of us appreciate. I didn't really like the Doomsday story arc either. I mean, they took the destruction of Superman and turned it into something much less. And I sort of would rather they had done something different.
They've wasted that story on every level. I mean, right up to Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, when they showed him to you in the freaking trailer. So they should never. They've wasted any opportunity they have to tell that death of Superman story. If they do something else down the line, then so be it. But they've gone to the well enough on that one. It's bad. It's ruined, as we say down south.
Martian Manhunter. That is just such a great character, and he did it so well. And Phil Morris is just good in everything.
Yeah. Well, you know,
I grew up watching his dad in Mission Impossible, so.
Well, I don't want to go off on a big tangent, but the fans of Barbara Gordon as Oracle would say that DC goes back to the well a lot of times because they don't know what else to do. And if I read one more confrontation between Barbara Gordon and the Joker, my head may explode. So it's just, yeah, sometimes they just get into a rut, it seems like, and they think, oh, well, this worked really well, so we'll just trot it out and do it again. And I thought, like you said, Sam Witwer did a really good job. I thought all the actors handled it really well. It's just, for me, the story was like, you're bringing out the guy who killed Superman, and it's comparatively easy to get rid of him, you know, compared to what it was in the comics. I don't know. Do you all want to add anything else on guest actors before we move on to something else? What, is there anything that you wish they had done that they didn't, or that they did and you wish they had done differently?
So I know this may sound like blasphemy. I wish the series had been shorter. I felt like there were a lot of times in there, particularly once Rosenbaum left the show, that they just didn't really know what they wanted to do. They didn't know who the villain ought to be. It didn't seem like he ever really had a whole lot of chemistry with any of the other villains. Again, I thought Marsters was a nice touch for one season as Brainiac, but I don't know. I felt like there were a number of good stories with seasons 6 through 10 that you could have taken the best of that and compressed it down into about 2 seasons. And I think your series would have been a little bit better for it. But that's TV. I mean, when you've got a moneymaker, they don't want to let it go. And that's why you get sometimes a little bit longer in the tooth than maybe you ought to be. So that's it, you know, and I have kind of the same issue with Supernatural. I feel like that by the time they ended it, there was really not a whole lot of weight to it. You know, I think, you know, when you go back and you watch the end of that season 5 finale with, you know, what the creator of the series, what Kripke had intended to be the final shot of the show, I think you can see just how heavy that would have been. But the CW made money hand over fist, and they were right to keep bringing the show back. Smallville, I think, got a little bit of that too. I'll never turn my nose up at an episode of Smallville ever, but there were definitely some toward the end of the show that I could have done without.
I think the world is headed now in a direction where we're used to seeing tighter plotting and shorter seasons that have better thematic arcs. And now that we're getting used to seeing that, it's hard to look back on these 22, 23 episode seasons and not say, you know, it would have been better if they'd cut out the dreck and maybe made this 15 episodes. Because we have the benefit of our 2020 hindsight, and we don't understand that, you know, the world is now full of streaming and HBO, and 10 episode seasons are now the norm, or however long it takes you to tell the story that you want to tell in your season, and that people now accept that.
Now I'm so used to like 6 episode miniseries, or I'm watching the HBO Max Titans series, which is usually 10 to 12 episodes, that I started watching Andor, and I thought it was 6 episodes. And I thought, what do you mean there's an episode 7? And so I watched that, and it's like, well, there's an episode 8. And finally, I resorted to the Google to find out what was going on and discovered that it's in fact 12 episodes. And I think it's unusual, I agree with you, to find things that are that long, especially on shows that are primarily on streaming. And even Superman and Lois does half their season in one clump and half their season in another clump with a hiatus.
Well, and with a definite half season finale.
Yeah.
Opposed to we just stopped part way and at random because that's where the football games go or something.
Yeah. I mean, even going back to 2008, 2009, as you started to get into the the seasons 8 and season 9, even then you could start to kind of feel it. It's like you had your big arc for the season that you were following, and you had the premiere for the season, and then typically maybe an episode or two after that when you're going to tie into that story, and then we're going to take a break for a while, and then you're going to have the episode of the week, case of the week stuff that's going to take you into your mid-season finale, and then you're going to get back to that major arc, and then you're going to come back from the mid-season finale and you're going to tie that off, and then you're going to be gone again until May when sweeps start back up, and then we're going to get back in. You could see the formula after a while, even then. So
yeah. Well, we've covered pretty much everything that I had on my list. Is there anything else that you all want to mention before we wrap up?
just that I'm really excited to see this animated series get off the ground. I really hope this happens. Tom Welling and Michael Rosenbaum been talking about it for quite a while. The last I heard is that this is going to happen. And I think that's a great way to continue the Smallville story, bringing back the original cast to do voices, do it as an animated series. I'm all in. I'd love to see it happen. I hope I get a chance to see that.
Only if they do a Scooby-Doo crossover episode. Looking back at it, this is the first time I've really gone back and watched them again since they were originally on. They hold up surprisingly well, and it's still worth going back and watching the whole series, because even saying, hey, maybe this could have been a shorter season, or there is a lot of filler in there, it's really well done and it holds up really well.
Yeah, it's for my money, it's the last time Superman was done right. You've had instances when I feel like the character, they did okay with him. Again, I love Henry Cavill. I think he is the right guy to play Superman. I think the stories that they've given him have just been frankly pretty bad. I just, for my money, Smallville was the last time Superman really felt like Superman, and not Superman, let's try and make him different somehow so we can make him relevant to the times. I think Superman is a timeless character for a reason. And I feel like Smallville, particularly in those early years, man, they really nailed the soul of why that is and why he's so beloved as a character.
I'm not going to argue there about some of the things they've had him do that are not right.
Yeah.
Well, I think both Henry Cavill and Brandon Routh were shortchanged by the scripts that they had.
Yep.
I mean, when whoever James Marsden's character was, James White, Perry's nephew, that was Lois's
White's son.
Yeah. When he is a more interesting character than the lead character, that's not the actor's fault. That's the material. And so, well, I really appreciate you all joining me to talk about Smallville. Thank you for being with us. Why don't you tell people where they can find you? If you have anything just out or coming up that you want to highlight, please do that. And Elektra, please start.
Elektra Hammond, you can find all of the information about me at untilmidnight.com. And I've got an announcement coming up, so watch the skies.
Cool. Ian J. Malone, ianjmalone.net is the website. Go there, find about my books. If you sign up for my mailing list, you get 3 free short stories. So enjoy those. You can get links to my podcast. We're on Apple, Google, Stitcher, Spotify, all the usual places. Links to all of my books and series are there. I just turned one into the publisher. That'll be out in March. It's set in the salvage title universe, which has actually been the film rights have been optioned for that one. And it is going to be, it's a little bit of a pet project. Think Major League meets The Replacements, meets Friday Night Lights, meets Varsity Blues, meets all of those wonderful sports stories, but in space in about 9,000 years with aliens and spaceships. That's what I did. And it's awesome. And I love it. And I can't wait for you guys to see it. And that'll be out in March.
Well, you can usually find me on something here at ConTinual. My website is nancynorthcott.com. The easiest place to find me on social media is Twitter, where I probably spend more time than is good for me, and I'm at Nancy Northcott. My latest release is Paranormal Romance: Embattled Mage, which is the 4th book in Paranormal Romance series. And don't start with that one, start with the first one, but that's the new one. So thank you again to the panelists for joining me for this discussion. Thanks to all of you for watching, and thanks to our sponsors, Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. For more information about them, visit www.heroesonline.com. Thank you.